When Machachari debuted on Kenyan television, it became a cultural phenomenon, especially for a generation of children who grew up watching lives unfold on Citizen TV. Central among its young ensemble was Almasi, impeccably dressed, quick-witted, and exuding a confidence that made him unforgettable on screen. To millions of Kenyan families, Munene, his real name, was more than an actor. He was a character who seemed to embody youthfulness with flair. Yet the ease with which Almasi carried himself in front of the camera masked a profound dissonance in the young man behind the role. Ian stepped into the spotlight while still a child, and that spotlight became both his introduction to fame and the first layer of tension between his public persona and his private reality. For most viewers, the confident Almasi was simply who he was. For Ian himself, the performance would become a mirror that reflected aspirations he struggled to embody inwardly, and expectations he never fully asked for. This tension between appearance and authenticity would become a recurring theme throughout his life. Ian's upbringing was shaped by contrasts. His mother was a devout Catholic, community-oriented, and fiercely protective, the central figure in his home. She carried the dual burden of parenthood and spiritual guidance, a role that both anchored Ian and exposed him to the limits of one person's capacity to protect a child from life's complexities. His father was largely absent, leaving a void that would define his earliest relationship with masculine identity. Where his father should have stood, other men, uncles struggling with alcoholism, and a stepfather whose behavior toward his mother verged on abusive, filled the scene, offering distorted examples of manhood. Ian would later reflect on how this shaped his vision of what it means to be a man, not as a figure of strength and protection, but often as a flawed or harmful presence. Growing up without a reliable male role model, he developed a complex relationship with masculinity that would later inform his spiritual search for inner discipline and compassion over dominance and aggression. For a child, few things are as disorienting as having the world's eyes on you before you have a settled sense of self. As Machachari's Almasi, Ian became a household name, and with that name came both adoration and scrutiny. The applause was intoxicating, but so were the whispers in school corridors, on playgrounds, and later, across social media. Growing up famous meant facing bullying that cut deeper than typical childhood teasing. Criticisms didn't just target a fleeting outfit or choice, but the essence of who he was becoming. Netizens guessed at his sexuality and questioned his behavior well before he had the language or confidence to define himself. Internally, Ian admitted that he often held back from expressing his true opinions, from revealing his feelings, and sometimes even from being himself, because he was preoccupied with what others thought of him. The confident, brash Almasi on screen became armor, a persona that protected him by hiding the very vulnerabilities he longed to express. After years on Machachari, life began to shift. Ian left Kenya for the United Kingdom to pursue higher education at the University of Kent, graduating in mid-2019. In the UK, away from the intensity of Kenyan public gaze, he encountered anonymity, and with it, a freedom he had never known. Without the constant feedback loop of viewers' expectations, Ian was confronted with himself in ways he had long avoided. The transition allowed him to question everything: his identity, his beliefs, and the role fame had played in shaping him. But freedom, when first encountered, can feel destabilizing. With no set script to follow, Ian entered a period of exploration, one that would stretch across spiritual, philosophical, and personal boundaries. The very things that once defined him now felt inadequate as tools for understanding who he really was. The turning point came not gradually, but like a wave crashing onto shore. While in the UK, Ian received news that his mother, the pillar of his existence, had been diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer that had spread to her lungs. The diagnosis plunged him into one of the darkest phases of his life. Grief, confusion, and unanswered questions about suffering and faith converged, leading him into depression. He turned to substance use in an attempt to numb the anguish and, in private moments, confronted God with the hardest question: if God truly exists, why do bad things happen to good people? especially when the person's suffering was his mother, a woman of deep faith and selfless generosity. Those questions and the emotional collision they triggered sent him deeper into a spiritual search for answers that conventional religion had failed to provide. Amid this turmoil, Ian met a friend who opened a door he had never noticed before, a Hindu temple in Nairobi, where monks responded to his questions with wisdom drawn from scripture, philosophy, and lived practice, not judgment or dismissal. Intrigued, he became vegetarian and spent time learning in the community, finding in those teachings something that resonated with his questioning soul. When he returned to the UK, he continued his engagement, connecting with monks and immersing himself deeper into the culture and philosophy. Eventually, he decided to live in a monastery, a place where basic needs were provided, but where one's service became the currency of life. There, Ian found something radical, not wealth or titles, but peace, discipline, and a path that honored inner growth over outward performance. He committed himself to spiritual service, leading discussions and devoted practice, and was formally initiated into the Hare Krishna movement in London in 2023. Ian's transformation was met with public fascination and misunderstanding. His outward appearance, robes, nose ring, nails painted, and expressions of devotion, was misinterpreted by many, especially on social media, where speculation about his identity and motives ran rampant. Some assumed declarations about his sexuality where none had been made. Others mocked him for his shift in appearance. Yet, Ian met much of this with humor, candor, and self-possession, confronting detractors without shrinking from the life he had chosen. Meanwhile, his mother's initial fear that he had been brainwashed eventually softened as she witnessed the tangible changes in his character, sobriety, calmness, and groundedness that had eluded him before. What began as estrangement evolved into cautious acceptance, demonstrating that transformation need not erase the bonds of love, but can, in time, renew them. By 2023, Ian left the monastery and re-entered the practical world, paying bills, working, and engaging with the day-to-day demands most people navigate. But he carried with him the discipline, insight, and compassion cultivated through years of spiritual practice. Today he creates content, shares teachings rooted in his journey, and speaks to audiences about identity, purpose, and inner peace. Reflecting on how quickly time has passed since his Machachari days, he emphasizes not who he was, but who he is becoming, and invites others to ask their own questions unfiltered by external expectation. His journey, from child star to seeker, from public persona to spiritual practitioner, is not a neat success story nor a fairy tale of escape. It is instead a human odyssey of grappling with loss, confronting uncertainty, and refusing to let the world's definition of him be the final word.